I already know what you're thinking. Jordan, how many reverse culture shock videos are you going to make? And while it is true that I am milking this topic, I think that now is a more relevant time than ever for me to make a video like this, because as you can see, we are in a different location than usual. So if you haven't been keeping up with the recent vlogs, basically my girlfriend and I are currently taking a nationwide trip. So we are driving some absolutely insane miles and hours and exploring as much of the country as we possibly can within about a 3 to 4 week span. And right now we are in Chicago, which would mean that we are about maybe halfway through our trip, if that. I'm saying this to say that not only are we in a different location today, but we're pretty much in a different location every day these days. In fact, I think this is our 16th state in 15 days of traveling. Bearing that in mind, I have some reverse culture shocks that I need to talk about, because I'm starting to realize that I was kind of wrong about America. Now, yes, America has a lot of issues, for sure. And in fact, some of these issues have been further confirmed throughout this trip. But at the same time, there are other issues which have been proven wrong, at least to an extent. For starters, public transit. So I've mentioned in the past that the US is severely lacking when it comes to anything public transit related. And we started our trip on the East Coast. So first we went to New Orleans, and then from there we went up the East Coast to New York and then Boston, seeing DC along the way. Now we're in Chicago. And I would say that New York, Boston, DC, and Chicago offer just as good of public transit as I personally saw in Europe. Now, is it as advanced? Probably not. It's probably a little bit more archaic. Maybe the trains aren't quite as nice. Maybe some of the people that you might see on the buses aren't really people that you want to be around. But at least it's there. In Dallas, a lot of times it's just not there. And you saw when we tried to take the train in Dallas, I mean, you literally needed cash just to get on the train, and the train doesn't even go anywhere meaningful other than downtown. So I have been proven wrong in that regard. We've taken the public transit in some of these cities, New York, Boston, and DC, correct? We took the public transit in all 3 of those cities. We didn't get a chance to take the public transit here in Chicago, but the point is, it is here. They do have it, and it seems to be extensive enough that people use it to commute on a day-to-day basis. Now, as far as the cost of the public transit goes, honestly, I don't know if it's more expensive than Dutch public transit. Do you think it's more expensive?
A little bit, I think so, yeah. It's
more expensive, yeah. So it's a little more expensive to take the public transit, and it's probably not as nice, but it is as extensive. So it does go pretty much anywhere you need to go. So that's definitely very, very nice. I'm glad that I was wrong about that. But again, I only mentioned, what, 3 or 4 cities that have robust public transportation. In the vast majority of America and American cities, you're just not really going to have that. So I was wrong, but I was also kind of right. Now, aside from public transit, another thing that has surprised me as we've taken this trip, let's go ahead and go this way, see where this goes, is the prevalence of bike lanes. So listen, I don't care where you are in the US, you are not going to see biking infrastructure like you'll see in the Netherlands. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if you won't see biking infrastructure like that anywhere else in Europe or anywhere else in the world, because the Netherlands is just far and away the best country for cycling. But I will say that a lot of these places that we've seen thus far, and again, there's kind of this correlation between having robust public transit and having that cycling infrastructure, a lot of these places do have much better cycling infrastructure than you will ever see in Dallas. So if you didn't see the video maybe a month or 2 ago, we filmed a video where we tried cycling from just a typical American suburb to a nearby grocery store. I say nearby, it's probably about a 40-minute ride. But we quickly realized that cycling in Dallas is just not a good idea. If you have to go anywhere beyond your neighborhood or the immediate surrounding areas, it's just not a good idea. And even then, it can still be very tricky and scary. In a place like Chicago, for example, I don't see any bike lanes here. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they have some kind of in between the buildings. But at the very least, it seems like drivers are a lot more courteous to cyclists. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any cyclists. So it is nice to see that it's somewhat encouraged. They also have a bike share system. They have that in Dallas as well, but again, I wouldn't mess with that because I don't trust the drivers out there. But here, Boston, New York, maybe DC as well, honestly, I did entertain the idea of maybe renting those bikes so that we could ride around, because the cycling culture, at the very least, even if the infrastructure isn't there yet, the cycling culture is at least somewhat present. Now, if you opt to drive here in the US, I'm just gonna be transparent with you. Something that I've observed, and look, again, we have traveled almost half the country at this point. Something I've observed is that drivers here are absolutely fucking crazy. So I was right about that. That is another reverse culture shock that I've observed, especially coming from the Netherlands, where drivers are extremely courteous, extremely mindful and aware of their surroundings. It seems like here, drivers are very, very individualistic in how they think. They're thinking about making their exit by any means necessary, even if it means cutting off traffic and causing a traffic jam that goes back literally 10 or 20 miles. And I know this because I've seen it with my own eyes, and I know you've seen it as well, that drivers here do not care about anybody else on the road. Occasionally you'll have a courteous driver who will let you merge and things like that. But a lot of times here, if you're not aggressive, if you're not willing to take your space and kind of just cut people off, you're not going to get anywhere. You're not going to make it to your destination in a timely manner. And again, I'm speaking from first-hand experience with that. It's very, very frustrating. And this applies in the big cities and the smaller cities, even in the suburbs. You just have to be very, very aggressive. And I'll actually make a video where I just showcase what it's like to drive here in the near future, because I'm gonna be doing a lot of driving over these next few days. But in a recent video, I did a little POV of me driving. I think it was in New Orleans, and I saw a few people mention or point out that I was in the left lane or the middle lane, and I shouldn't have been. The reason why I was doing that was because here in the US, if you don't get into that lane early, if you know you're gonna have to turn left and you don't get into that lane early, if there are other cars in that lane, a lot of times they're not gonna let you into that lane. So you have to get in very, very early, and that's a big part of the reason why you see people here driving in the middle and left lanes, is because people don't let other people in. And it's very infuriating when you're driving, because there have been a few times where we missed the exit because people would not let us in. But saying this to say that driving here kind of just sucks. And I'm sure driving in the Netherlands is stressful in the sense that you have a lot more to think about. There are more rules, but because everyone's thinking about those rules, the driving experience actually becomes more pleasant for all involved, including cyclists and pedestrians. Now, speaking of which, another reverse culture shock from having traveled around the US is the prevalence of pedestrians. So look, we're in Chicago right now. In the immediate area, it's kind of desolate, but that's kind of by intention. It's because I just wanted to find a quiet area to film. But as we cross this bridge over here, you're gonna see there are gonna be a lot more people. And probably earlier in the video, you saw that there were many more pedestrians, because when you get into these inner city areas or around these inner city areas, people actually walk. People remember that they have two legs and they have the ability to walk, and they do so. And that's something that you just don't see a whole lot of in Dallas. I don't know what it is about Dallas specifically. I'm starting to realize that Dallas might be the outlier rather than the rule. It might be a bit of an anomaly by American standards, but at the same time, I feel like, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but when we see places like, let's say, Cleveland, or a lot of these third-tier cities, they kind of look like smaller versions of Dallas. They look desolate. There aren't a whole lot of people out, not really much public transit. Dallas is kind of like all of the worst American stereotypes, just exaggerated tenfold. It's basically a city built on the worst parts of American culture. Everything from the hyper-materialism to the lack of public transit, so on and so forth. And Dallas is actually one of the largest cities in the country. But I digress. You can already see from here that there are many more people out and about. It's pretty cold today, but people are out and about, walking. I see someone on the skateboard, cycling. Because again, they don't take for granted the fact that they have legs. You can see right here, there are people waiting for the train. People here actually take public transit because it's not something that you'll be shamed for, at least not to my knowledge. Maybe it is, maybe I'm wrong about that, but when I see that many people taking public transit, I see it as something that is likely normalized. I wonder what these footsteps are all about. I don't know what was going on over here, but like I said, people are out here walking, for better or for worse. I don't know where they were walking to or from, but they are out here walking. Now, listen, I know I'm kind of painting the US in a positive light in this video, which is very uncharacteristic of me. Here's the truth. If you want to have this kind of experience, where you have the public transit, you have the cycling culture, you have the walkability and the general liveliness that you get in most European cities, the reality is that the cost of living in a city that has all of these things is astronomical. That is the truth. That is the cold, hard truth. And that's probably been the biggest reverse culture shock for me coming back to the US and traveling around the US, is realizing that, okay, you can get somewhat of the experience that you would get in a lot of the Dutch cities, for example, or places like Zurich or Valencia, European cities that I've been to. The problem is you're gonna pay 2 to 3 times as much for that experience. And again, you're getting a watered down version. So you don't have the level of public transit here that you would in Europe. You don't have the level of liveliness. Maybe you do in some places, but I mean, those places are astronomically expensive. In other words, this right here, what you're seeing, this is kind of a watered down version in a sense of what you would see in Europe. Don't let these big buildings fool you. This is still a very good place to visit, in my opinion. I think that everyone should visit Chicago once in their lives, especially if you want that authentic American experience. But at the same time, you have to understand that if you're gonna live in a place like this, if you want those kinds of amenities, you're gonna pay a shit ton of money for it. For example, in New York, I think I've mentioned this in multiple videos, I'm still kind of heated about this, but I paid $71 for 2 hours of parking. Right now, we're in Chicago and our car is in, I think, that parking garage over there with the blue sign. And I paid $38, but that's for 3 hours of parking. Still pretty steep, and I imagine that's kind of in line with what you might see in a place like Amsterdam. But again, Amsterdam is gonna have these alternate forms of transportation. Not that Chicago doesn't. We could have taken the train here, but we have a lot more driving to do today. The point that I'm making is that you have these amenities, but they come at a premium. Whereas in the Netherlands, even if you live in a suburb, even if you live in a place like Vassen with 12,000 people, you still have public transit, you still have bike lanes, you still have nice roads, you still have good drivers, you still have all of the things that you would have to move to a Chicago or a New York or a Boston to have here in the US. Except you have it at about half the price as those cities. So I'm saying all of this to say that I don't think the US is worth it. I know I've kind of said that in many videos, but I just don't think it's worth it to live here. Not even just because of the politics or all of that stuff. Those are things that fluctuate from election to election, from year to year, whatever. I'm talking about the constant. No matter who's in office, what is the reality of living in the US? That's the reality. If you are not very, very well off, then you're not going to get to benefit from a lot of these things that your average Dutch person gets to benefit from.